Hello, now we are continuing our learning about factoring by learning our next type of factoring, which is called complex trinomial factoring. I just said factoring a lot. Anyways, we are going to be learning how to do this with two different examples. So we are going to go through and just get started. So the first thing we need to know is how to actually identify a complex trinomial. So a complex trinomial has a coefficient other than 1 on x squared. In other words, a is not equal to 1. So we use a process that we call decomposition. Now, this is not the only method that is out there. There are other methods, but this is the one that I have found success with. But you could absolutely Google how to factor complex trinomials if you're interested in a different process. So here we will actually, this is a factored version of a complex trinomial, and let's expand it, because last time when we did that, we found a pattern. So you get 2x squared plus 6x minus 3, which simplifies to 2x squared plus 5x minus 3. So before, we looked at the two numbers added to this and multiplied to -3. Well, the multiplication still stands, but the addition doesn't. Like if you do -1 and 3, that does not add to 5. And that's, of course, because the added complication of this coefficient. So we have to go through, unfortunately, a longer process in order to factor complex trinomials. So the first step, as silly as it sounds, is to identify that it actually is a complex trinomial. If it is simple, then you don't have to go through this long decomposition process. You can simply go to the answer as we did in the previous note. So the first thing to do is identify it as complex. So notice here that our a value is 3, and it's a trinomial, which makes it a complex trinomial. Then you remove any common factors. Okay, in this case, there are no common factors to remove, but sometimes there are. And if it is not a complex trinomial after you remove it, just like yesterday, then you can do it as a simple trinomial. Okay, so here's where the decomposition starts. You need to find two numbers that multiply to, whatever a and c are. So a and c, okay, is equal to, in this case, 3 times 4, which is 12, okay? But then we need to find two numbers that add to b. So that's the same. It's the same as the middle term. So in this case, 8. So for this example, I need two numbers that multiply to 12 and add to 8. So the general rule is two numbers that multiply to ac, so a times c, and that add to the b value. So in this case, we can think through the different numbers, what does these two things, but we can figure out that it's 6 and 2 in both cases. So 6 times 2 is 12, and 6 plus 2 is 8. So now we are going to do something that is called, we are going to decompose the middle term. So this 8x, we're going to break it into two terms. So we break it into two terms without changing the outcome. So I'm just going to rewrite the 3x squared plus 8x plus 4 to really show this. So the 3x squared is still the same, but we're going to take this 8x and make it into plus 6x plus 2x, and then still the plus 4. So all we've done is taken this 8x and break it down into two parts. We've decomposed it. And this is going to allow for factoring by grouping, okay, which we learned a couple notes ago. So make sure that the numbers that go next that are factorable go next to each other. So notice that our options were 6 and 2. So we could have also done 2 and 6 in that order. But notice that 3 and 6 are better next to each other because they have a common factor of 3. And 2 and 4 are better next to each other because they have a common factor of 2. So that will just make it a simpler process for you. So now the next step is to group the first two together and group the last two terms together, not forgetting the sign in the middle. Okay, so then you remove common factors. So in this case, I have 3x, and then I'm left with x plus 2. Then I carry down my plus, and from these I can factor out a 2, and I'm left with x plus 2. Now with decomposition, if you're doing it properly, this and this bracket should be the same thing, which allows now for us to common factor it out. So that will always happen if you are performing it correctly. Okay, so now I common factor out the x plus 2, and then I'm left with 3x plus 2. And you're done. Okay, so you can verify that you're right using the FOIL method. It's not always necessary, but it is always possible. So it is helpful on tests to know if you're right or not. So if I FOIL this out, I get 3x squared plus 2x plus 6x plus 4, which is 3x squared plus 8x plus 4, which is my original. So I know I did it right. Let's go through this process another time so you can learn it more thoroughly. Okay, first of all, this is a complex trinomial. Yes. Remove any common factors. There are none, so that doesn't matter. Okay, so remember, I need two integers that multiply to what a times c is. So a is 2, and c is negative 12. So I need the two numbers to multiply to negative 24. Then I need them to add to b. b in this case is 5. So I think through the different factors, and what works is 8 and negative 3 will multiply to negative 24, and it will add to positive 5. So now we decompose the middle term using these two numbers. So it's 2x squared. And now instead of the 5x, I'm going to write plus 8x minus 3x. Okay, again, this is the same thing as 5x, just in two terms instead of one. Then I have the minus 12. The next step is to group the first two terms, keep the middle, and group the last two terms. Okay, so from these two, I can common factor out a 2x, and then I'm left with x plus 4. From here, I can take out a minus 3, okay? It's important that it's a negative 3 that you are taking out, so that in the bracket, you have x plus 4. Remember, these two brackets should be the same thing. Okay, so how did I get an x plus 4? Well, think about it. I'm dividing out a negative 3. So if I do negative 12 divided by negative 3, that gives me the plus 4. Okay, then you use common factoring. So you common factor out the x plus 4, and what's left here is 2x, and then minus 3. Okay, and if you need to, or if the question requires it, you can FOIL to factor fully, or sorry, to verify. So 2x squared minus 3x plus 8x minus 12 is 2x squared plus 5x minus 12, which is our original question. So we're all good. Now's your turn. I would like you to practice these two, and I would like you to FOIL to verify that you are correct. Okay, in the next class, we'll learn how it's different when you add another variable in there, x and y's. However, I do want to do another example of when you have a common factor first. Okay, so in this case, you can remove a common factor. Actually, you know what? I'm changing my mind. I think this is supposed to be in the next lesson. So there we go. We're flexible people, right? Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you learned lots.